All right, welcome to our live webinar for support group leaders and their members and the professionals who serve people with brain injuries across our state and the military. I am proud to introduce Dr. Sheldon Herring. He is a 1983 graduate of the University of Arizona with a degree in neuropsychology and rehabilitation. Dr. Herring served as the clinical director of the outpatient traumatic brain injury and young stroke programs of Roger C. Peace Rehab Hospital. It's part of Prisma Health in Greenville, South Carolina. He currently serves as the chair for the board of directors for the Academy of Certified Brain Injury Specialists, ACVAS, and serves on the board of directors for the Brain Injury Association of America. He initiated the Brain Injury Leadership Academy to support the development of future leaders in the field and conducts workshops on neurological rehabilitation across the country. So I'm happy to turn the program over to Dr. Herring.
All right, it's my pleasure to be with you guys today. And let's see, I'm just checking out my controls here. So Susan's already given you a little bit of my background. I'm particularly proud of being the chair of ACVAS and so happy to see that a number of you have your CBISs, and we're encouraged by your commitment to the field of brain injury by maintaining that. Also, my presentation today is informed by the work we're doing through the Brain Injury Leadership Academy. The website is listed there if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Leadership Academy. And I have to start with giving credit to a group, Jim Detmer and his colleagues that developed this concept of conscious leadership. And sometimes when we talk about leadership, people automatically say, well, I'm not a leader. Well, you're always a leader of at least one. You're always a leader of yourself. And what we've done is we've taken Jim's material and learned how to apply it to the field of brain injury rehabilitation. As Susan mentioned already, I'm a neuropsychologist by background. I tell everybody that means my dad never quite understood what it is that I do. And wanted to just point out who's today's target audience is people with brains. And hopefully people who might benefit from being mindful about what their brains are doing. So that might be persons recovering from brain injury or stroke. It could be small group facilitators, educators. Essentially, it has sort of a very universal application. So again, the title for today is Mindfulness After Brain Injury. So we're going to spend a few minutes at the beginning talking about what we mean by mindfulness. So when they toss out that term mindfulness, a lot of different constructs or ideas sort of pop into people's minds, and different ideas associated with it. Mindfulness has received a lot of attention in the popular press, ranging from how to raise mindfully based children all the way up to mindful eating and other kinds of things. So it's got a little bit of a buzzword behind it, but in its simplest form, mindfulness is simply a state of open attention to what's going on in the present, what's going on right now, and being able to observe your thoughts and feelings as if you were almost looking over your own shoulder. That ability to be aware of our own thought content is sort of key to who we are as people, that humans have the ability to self-observe. And when we do that self-observation, it's not just of our thoughts, which is one of the areas of content that we do want to pay attention to, but also what's going on in our emotional centers. What are we noticing with regard to things like fear, anxiety, happiness, joy, and even deeper, what's our body trying to tell us in any circumstances? Because all of those can be targets of our effortful mindfulness. And there have been a number of research studies that show people who develop increased mindfulness can have a number of different significant health benefits from that. Ironically, just about 2 days ago, there was a study published in one of the major neurology journals that looked at using mindfulness training for individuals with multiple sclerosis, and found that mindfulness training was even more effective than traditional cognitive rehabilitation in helping them work on their working memory. So there's the idea of being able to exercise the discipline of stepping back and observing what's going on in our different centers of intelligence, the head, the heart, the gut, is sort of the core of all mindfulness. How that's manifested will depend on the particular mindfulness exercises you might adopt. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about some of the ranges of exercises, but we'll be introducing a very simple tool that we use within our program in just a second. So the topic for today is, again, mindfulness after brain injury. So obviously we need to spend a little bit of time talking about how the mind and the brain interface with one another and sort of what's their relationship. And to start that, I'd like to present this poem by Emily Dickinson. I'm going to walk through it so we can really absorb this. So the brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will include with ease and you beside. So you actually exist in your brain. Your brain can take in the idea of the sky. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb, as sponges buckets do. Your brain has the ability to fathom something as magnificent as the sea. The brain is just the weight of God, for lift them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do, as syllable from sound. So if you think about it, our brain is how we interact with the universe, how we interact with the rest of all created beings and even God himself. So the idea that the brain is just the weight of God brings up the idea of the incredible complexity of the human brain. And folks have been studying the human brain for hundreds of years, and the complexity sort of has snuck up on us. When you first look at the human brain, anatomists recognized that it was somewhat looked at on the surface almost disorganized. And early anatomists thought that the actual tangible structures of the brain were simply like the walls of a cave that allowed spirits to move in and out of the spaces in and around the brain. And it was those spaces that were thought to be the real functional part of the brain. And it wasn't until hundreds of years later that the first neuron or brain cell was identified. It was actually identified by accident in a laboratory accident. And that led to the search for what are the neurons doing? And very quickly, one of the things that was discovered is there are lots of different types of neurons, and there's layering upon layers of neurons within the human brain. If you were to take all the axons from all the neurons in a single adult brain and put them end to end, they would circle the globe 2.5 times at the equator. So incredibly complex, but as scientists started to try to understand individual neurons and look at what they did, real quickly what they recognized was those neurons are impacted by lots of other neurons around them. And as they began to look at these neurons, what they found was those were also impacted to the point where what they found was an incredibly complex association of neurons, to the point where it was actually difficult to track the influence, all the influences on a single neuron. And the outcome of all those different connections was the ability to be self-aware. So the very nature of how our brains are designed allow us the opportunity to be self-aware, and self-awareness is the key to mindfulness. So I love this quote from Dan Siegel. It says, our minds use our brains to create themselves. So our minds choose what our brains are going to focus on. Our brains then are changed by what we focus on, and our changed brains now allow for our minds to take on broader and broader ideas. So our minds get to choose, and our brains process and support even a broader mind. So to some extent, our brains are capable of what's been called self-directed neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is basically that idea of learning. The self-directed aspect allows our brains to choose what we're going to allow to impact us. And that's really at its core what mindfulness becomes, us choosing in a moment's notice what we allow ourselves to focus on. And this idea of choice was illustrated in this quote by, actually quoted by Viktor Frankl. He actually did not coin this phrase. He talks about between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our responses lie our growth and freedom. So what we're going to be doing next is taking some time to sort of tease that apart and find out how we can use that as a platform for our own mindfulness. So I want you to think about a time where things were not going well for you, and things were not going well for you because of you. Not because of other people, but maybe you had done something, maybe you had said something, maybe you had reacted in a way where you wish you could take the clock back. Maybe it's just a few minutes to unsend an email. Maybe it's a few seconds just to allow yourself to rethink your choice of words. It could be a few years to rethink your choice of careers. But it's the idea of, I wish I could turn the clock back. And a lot of times, the thing that we really need is not just more facts, but we want to actually stop and say, what is it, what I reacted to, how you reacted to a thought, or the thoughts you might have had about a fact. So the idea is, it's not just I was missing a piece of information, but how you've allowed yourself to become wired over time. And is it possible through mindfulness to essentially turn the clock back or slow it down enough so that you can change your natural reaction patterns? And the answer to that is yes. And so we're going to explore some of the tools of mindfulness. Now, when I tell folks that we're talking about the brain and tools, right away they think, oh, this is going to have to be a really, really complex tool. It's going to have all kinds of gadgets to it because the brain is so incredibly complex. And I tell them, actually, no, all that other stuff gets in the way. Well, at least it's going to have something hyper specialized to just the brain. And the answer is no. The tool is actually very, very simple. And the tool that we use is this. It's simply a line. End of talk. No, not end of talk, all right? But asking yourself the question of where am I at right now? What's going on in my head? What are the thoughts that I'm having in this moment, in this time? What are the feelings that I'm having, the emotional feelings? Where's my heart? And what's my body trying to tell me? And in stepping back in reference to the line, when you're below the line, you find yourself coming from a place of fear where you're closed, feeling a need to defend yourself, and it's about the need to be right. Now, I teach this at the medical school, and I tell the medical students, this is not about being right about a particular diagnosis or about a particular dosage. It's about the need to be right. Can you allow yourself to be wrong? So when you stop and ask yourself, and you find if you're coming from that place of fear, frequently you're what we call below the line. And we're going to explore in just a minute the difference in the energies that come with the below the line and above the line. The goal is to be able to, if you're below the line, recognize it and move into that state of openness, presence, and curiosity, where you trust that in those moments, there's something you might be able to learn. And most of the time, the learning is not going to be about a fact. The learning is going to be about yourself and sort of how you're wired. So if you think about the mental and emotional energy when you're in that state of fear, in that state of being closed to what's going on around you, it's not a positive energy. It's not something that really supports learning or mindfulness. So one way of knowing when you're below the line is step back and ask yourself, what are some of the beliefs, behaviors, and statements that I tend to endorse when I'm in that position of being defensive or below the line? So not that any one person would endorse all of these. And since this webinar will be up for a couple of months, I would invite you to come back later and just sort of do an inventory and say, which of these beliefs do I tend to cling to? What are some behaviors or statements that reflect when I'm coming from a place of defensiveness? So just for me as a content expert in brain, one of the things I recognized is that I really had the belief that it was very important for me to be right most of the time. And as a result, I tended to cling to my opinions, and I would tell you that I was right. And I found out that that didn't really get me very far with my staff. It didn't allow me to learn about myself because I was more about defending where I was coming from. And so I just invite you to come back a little bit later and say, do you, when you look at these, are any of these ringing true for you? Now we're going to ask the same question. What does it feel like when a person is above the line? What's the mental and emotional energy that comes from this? By being present and open, there can be a very positive energy. It doesn't have to be an overpowering energy. It may even be manifested primarily by feelings of calmness. And another way of recognizing when a person has been able to shift to above the line is they see those beliefs, behaviors, and statements beginning to change. So for me, one of the things that I began to recognize, I could say it before I could actually believe it, is it's more valuable for me to learn and grow than to be right in a particular circumstance. Could I see that there was more than one possibility and truly believe that? Not just say it, but get to the point where I can actually have that as a core belief. So for example, one of my core beliefs is, one of my favorite words is and, A-N-D. I've replaced it either or with and. So there are so many times when I step back and I find myself below the line where I'm making assumptions about what's going on in myself or the people around me, and I ask the question, and what else might be true? Can I really get curious? Do I need to stop and do some deep breathing? Do I need to stop and or take responsibility for what's going on? So those are some just brief descriptors of what it might look like to be above or below the line. I inserted this next slide in case we have time at the end. I'm actually going to circle back around to this. This is about a 4-minute video, and I'm not sure we're going to have time to do it. So I might come back to this. It brings a summary of Jim Detmer's model about being above or below the line. Another thing to real quickly do is to make sure that you don't beat yourself up when you're below the line. Below the line is a natural place that your brain takes you to. But it is important to recognize when you're below the line and then just simply say, this is how things are right now. And then ask yourself, am I willing to shift? Have I drifted below the line? And am I willing to shift back above the line? One way of recognizing when you're below the line is what are called drift moves. And again, you can come back and do a little bit more deep review of this. But have you ever found yourself doing certain things like checking email? We check email all day long, like the world's going to end if we don't check our email, or for the younger folks who do all those other social media things, we act as if the world's going to end if we don't contact our devices every 2 or 3 minutes or 2 or 3 seconds. That can be a signal to yourself that you simply need to stop and go, wow, what's going on right now? Am I trying to avoid something? Am I trying to ignore something? And am I running from something? And then asking yourself, am I willing to shift? Am I willing to step back and just ask, I wonder what's going on right now. I wonder what my head, my heart, and my gut might be trying to teach me or tell me in this moment. So being in the moment is the state of presence. Being sincerely curious about what's going on and interested in learning about what's going on, how I got into the mindset, what's going on right now can help you lift the drama that you might find yourself in. So let's go back to the Frankl quote again. It says, between stimulus, that was the past. The stimulus could have been, you, out of the corner of your eye, you saw your phone vibrate or something come up in the corner of your screen, or you heard something down the hallway, or you're remembering what your partner said as you were leaving for work this morning. That's the past. There's going to be a response, but the response is in the future. And what mindfulness allows us to say is that there is a present, the presence where I can stop and consider my options. Now, in the beginning, as we're beginning to learn how to practice mindfulness, that space between stimulus and response can sometimes be measured in just microseconds. It's literally every time my wife says this or my son says that, this word pops out of my mouth, and you go, wait a minute, that wasn't a very long time. But as I learn what stimuli tend to trigger me, that space gets a little bit broader to the point where I have more options to choose my response. And it's in my response and in that choice where my growth as an individual can be. So one thing another tool that can be helpful is being able to separate fact from story and meaning, because much of the drama that is in our lives comes from our interaction with other people. And we're always making up stories about the content of other people's behaviors, other people's statements, and we're even making up stories about other people's thoughts. So this idea of fact, story, meaning says that there are very few observable facts, true facts. Facts are only those things that you could record using a video or audio camera. But what happens right away is our brains begin to create a story about the facts. And the thing we need to recognize is our stories are not facts. And frequently we can't discriminate the fact from the story. And so a really good author, if you want to explore this more, is Brene Brown. She has a number of YouTube videos talking about this idea of the human brain as the ultimate storyteller or story maker. So let's say you're at a faculty meeting or running a brain injury support group, and you look across the room and you notice that one of the other participants is looking back at you, and they're looking over the top of their glasses. So the only facts are that you see that the person's head is turned in your direction, and their eyes, as you look at them, are peering out over the top of your glasses. Immediately, your brain begins to make up story. And I already introduced a line of the story, and the line of the story that I introduced is that they're looking at you. And all they're doing, their head is in your direction. You don't know if they're looking at you or not, but our brains very quickly go to story. And then from story, we ascribe meaning. And usually the meaning that we ascribe is where our emotional content gets introduced. So the fact is, person's head is aimed in my direction. When I look at them, it looks to me like they're looking over the top of their glasses. And the meaning I take away from that is they're giving me the stink eye. They don't like what I said. And oh, by the way, you know, they never quite are cooperative in this group, and they never give me a break. And then your brain just goes on, and story and meaning just begin to build on one another to the point that the drama develops. And that drama can be acted upon or stay within yourself, but it can produce really significant stressors overall. So the idea that the meaning we attribute to the stories create are driven by facts, but it's not just the facts. And all of that impacts how we show up in the world. So the question is, can I create stories or ascribe meaning from a lens of a more positive perspective that brings to the table more possibilities? So the, oops, go beyond that one. So the idea is, does this simple little line do the trick for us? And the question is our brain, that complicated, incredibly complicated brain, can it be driven by something as simple as stopping and asking the question, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I noticing right now? And the answer is, yes, it can. And the answer comes from the role of how our brains are designed, particularly around what our amygdala does. So if you were to go deep inside your brain, you're going to find this little cluster of cells that sit right at the head of the hippocampus. The hippocampus is very, very important for processing new memories. But the amygdala is sort of the gatekeeper. The amygdala does a number of different things very, very quickly. As information is flowing into the brain, the amygdala really quickly does a threat assessment. It's asking itself, what's going on out there? Is this something that is important? Is it something that I need to respond to? And in particular, is it something that is threatening to me? Is it physically threatening? Is it emotionally threatening? Is it something that even threatens my way of thinking? That response by the amygdala happens incredibly, incredibly quickly, to the point where it begins to shut down other areas of the brain, which are a little bit slower. Now, all of this is happening in terms of fractions of a second, but the amygdala gets there first. And the amygdala frequently is in error, it jumps to conclusions. So what the amygdala does in what's called the amygdala hijack is it really quickly makes assumptions. So let's say you're in the backyard, you got a garden, and you're reaching down, and when you reach down, you see something that's about an inch around. It looks like it's about a foot long, and it moved. What's the job of your amygdala? If we had all your mics open, hopefully most of you would say it's a snake, and you're going to do what? You're going to jump, you're going to yell, you might pee your pants or whatever else. That's the job of the amygdala, all right? What the amygdala does is it prevents the rest of the cortex from stopping and going, well, wait a minute, let's debate whether this is a poisonous snake or not. Let's debate whether this was the snake or whether it was the garden hose that my wife was pulling around the corner. The amygdala errs on the side of pessimism. Yeah, it was the garden hose and you really did overreact. But man, if it had been a poisonous snake, you'd rather be safe than sorry. So the amygdala builds story incredibly fast, and it does not distinguish between the physical threat and psychological threat. So in the amygdala's world, sticks and stones and words are all the same. So what are some of the strategies that can be used to help the amygdala calm down? And one of them is the simple act of labeling and reframing. That idea of being able to put into words what's going on, that then allows the rest of your brain to step in and say, okay, well, amygdala, I've got it from here, all right? So let's say, going back to our gardening example, you saw the thing, it moved, you jumped back. Now you can say, oh, I'm 6 feet away from this, and the frontal lobe can go, okay, I can take it from here because that was only a foot long. It can't get to me. I'm 6 feet away. And now I can begin to look a little bit more closer and go, oh, that's a garden snake. That's good. I'm going to leave him in my garden. Or I'm not sure what kind of snake that is. I'm going to call my neighbor and have them come over here. Or yeah, it was the hose. I'm going to tell my wife to get the hose out of the garden. So as the rest of the brain begins to kick in, the amygdala says, okay, I've done my job. I'm checking out. I'm going to let the rest of you guys take over. So over time, that taking the time to refocus our attention along the lines of more positive expectations allows that space between stimulus and response to get a little bit larger and gives us a place where we can begin to develop new mental habits. And sort of going back to that slide earlier where the brain, the mind chooses what the brain focuses on, we can begin to do that self-directed neuroplasticity. Next thing I wanted to do, since there may be some persons with brain injury participating, and some of you who work with brain injury, is recognizing that injury to the brain brings an additional challenge to this whole conversation about mindfulness after brain injury. And one of those is the idea that awareness itself is a brain function that is at risk of damage as a result of brain injury. And the idea is a person can actually lose awareness of their environment. So those of you who work clinically, you would know by looking at this, this is a letter cancel or line bisection task where a person is looking at this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and you ask them to cross out all the lines, and they hit about half of them, and they simply don't pay attention to stuff over to one side. This is not a visual problem. It's a problem with what the person is able to direct their attention to. So in some clinical settings, that person would eat right down one side of their plate and not pay attention at all to the other side. This brings up the idea of anosognosia, and it's one of my favorite words. Gnosis is knowledge. Agnosia is a lack of knowledge. So agnosia is I don't know. So a person who says they're agnostic regarding the presence of a supreme being, they would say I don't know. Nosagnosia would be that you know that you don't know, and anosognosia is I don't know that I don't know. So anosognosia means that a person can have an impairment and not be aware of it. And to give you an example, I'm red-green colorblind, but I didn't know it until I was 17 years old, and I was doing a little experiment in a psychology class, and I got the wrong answer compared to everybody else in the class. So a person can have a limitation and not be aware of it. The other thing about changes in awareness as a result of brain injury is that it's not all or none. There's different levels of awareness. And I'll just do this part relatively quickly. The intellectual awareness is the ability to recognize what a problem is and what its implications are. Emergent awareness is the ability to actually see the problem when it's manifesting itself. And then anticipatory awareness is the ability to plan ahead and recognize when the issue may manifest itself. So intellectual awareness, if there are problems with intellectual awareness, it's difficult to comprehend the change that's going on. If there's difficulties with emergent awareness, it's hard to adapt. And if there's problems with anticipatory awareness, it's hard to plan ahead. So anytime we're working with individuals with brain injury, we need to recognize that there may be intellectual awareness, but the inability to see it when it's actually happening. There may be emergent awareness, but having difficulty with planning. Now, having said that, that same model applies to the normal human brain or the non-injured human brain. So it is possible for a person to have an area of weakness. They may have a bias in a particular area. They may have a presumption in a different area, and they just aren't aware of it. They may become aware of it, but they can't see it when it's actually manifesting itself. There you go again. Or they can recognize it when it's happening, but they can't plan to work around it. So just the idea that when we're working with awareness deficits, we need to be able to have that broader perspective. Awareness deficits are treatable in the quote normal, treatable in neurological cases and trainable in quote normal brains. The last idea I wanted to throw out here is the idea that we don't exist in a vacuum. Our brains are designed to process information and to process the intent of other brains. So interesting little experiment. You can take an infant rhesus monkey and stick your tongue out at it, all right, which is maybe not a kind thing to do. And guess what? The rhesus monkey will stick its tongue back out at you. Now, it doesn't know why you're doing that, but it is recognizing that something is going on. And this brings home the idea of mirror neurons, that at our core, our brains are social processors. And being conscious, being aware is not just about me, but it also is about the group of people I have around me. So in our program, we talk about moving from a pseudo team, a group of people who may be below the line, to an authentic team where we're all trying to get to that state of higher level of awareness. And it may be a little uncomfortable by having to go through some of these other gateways. All of these are areas we can expand on in the future if anybody would like, but I want to make sure we get a little bit further along here. So this idea of developing focus is a skill that can be developed. It's something that we can practice, because sometimes we've been practicing maladaptive or non-adaptive behaviors all of our life, and we believe that we really don't have a choice, but we do through the practices of mindfulness. So when we talk about mindfulness, a lot of folks will say, what does that mean? And it conjures up, you know, taking time off from your day and going and sitting on top of a mountain and contemplation. And that is one practice of mindfulness. But at its core, mindfulness is simply paying attention in the moment. Once again, what's going on in my mind, in my heart, in my gut, and can that serve me in any way? And in the beginning, it's about simply examining what we're attending to. So a couple of real simple practices that I have in my own life is, I'm going to jump ahead here. This is the door frame of my office. So at about, I'm 6'2", so at about 5'11", 6 inches, or 6 feet off the ground, I have these two question marks. And they stand for asking the question, in this moment, am I above or below the line? Am I about being present for the person or for the meeting I'm getting ready to go into? Or am I showing up like old Sheldon about being right? And I just had a thought pop into my head. I'm going to share this. I wasn't a big fan of, I'm blanking on the TV show, the Sheldon, the guy who's the astrophysicist or something. People are probably shouting out the name to me right now, I just can't hear you. But he's always
Theory.
Big Bang Theory. Thank you very much. Thanks for the rescue, Donna friend. Big Bang. So Sheldon in the Big Bang Theory is always right, and he's always about being right. So for me, it's about, can I show up as the genuine Sheldon of being present and recognizing that in any moment I have that opportunity to choose whether I'm going to be above or below the line. Another little tool that I have, and I'm not trying to make a bunch of money here, we actually have a coin. I always have one of these in my pocket that is a reminder that combines the question of above and below the line with the Viktor Frankl quote that says, reminds me that there's always a space between stimulus and response. There's always an opportunity for me to ask myself, where am I at right now? And am I willing to make the shift? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to real quickly zip back. Don't want anybody getting motion sick here. But I'm going to get back to the slide because I do think we have enough time to watch the great little video that will summarize everything we said today.
Yes, I think we have time.
All right, so let's do this. Oops. Oops, it's going to buffer on us. I'm going to go ahead and. All right, I'm going to go ahead and. Excuse me, guys. I got the thing that turns this off is hidden on my screen right now. There we go. Oops.
Are you ready for the question and answer, or are you still?
I don't want to turn this off now because I can't see my screen. So let me do this.
So if you can stop sharing, maybe we can do it.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm afraid if I dismiss you, I'll make you go out altogether. So, but well, let's see. So down there at the bottom where it says share screen, can you click on that and quit sharing your screen? And everybody else can turn your camera back on so we can see your little faces. Want to?
Okay.
So do you see that screen down there at the bottom? Can you?
There is no screen down at the bottom on mine, so.
So it says microphone, camera, screen, and leave. If you hover over at the middle of the screen in the bottom, there you go. All right. Everybody turn your cameras on if you want to. And if you have questions for Sheldon or comments, somebody says, thank you for this great presentation, Dr. Herring.
All right. I apologize. My thing is still running, so I. All right, there we go. I apologize for that, guys. We didn't do a dry run on that. Not used to using that platform. Am I still, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right.
We can hear you. So anybody that has a question, type it in the chat box or turn your camera on and unmute yourself and let's hear from you. We got a few minutes left. All right. Well, any final comments then, Sheldon?
Well, I do encourage you to go back and or you can actually go to a better place to find it is just remember the word conscious.is. Conscious is, and it'll take you to Jim Detmer's website, and then you can download the introduction to conscious leadership. and the little whiteboard drawing that I couldn't get to play on my computer here today. It's real good 3 to 4 minute summary of the idea of just being able to stop and ask yourself sort of where you're at. And I would just challenge you, those of you who have participated today, is as you go through the rest of the day, monitor what's going on, not in a paranoid way, just watch. What are the thoughts, the feelings, and the emotions you might be having around something? And ask yourself, I wonder if there's an alternative story that I could be making up about this, and how would that alternative story serve me?